Scandal in Formula One. Max Verstappen has uncovered something in the simulator that could rewrite the story of the championship. What if the track that has always been his kryptonite suddenly becomes his greatest weapon? Inside Milton Keynes, Verstappen has spent hours locked in front of the simulator, and what he found left even Red Bull's engineers stunned. Stay with me, because these revelations may not just change Singapore, they could change the entire season. A flawless weekend where the simulator work translates perfectly onto the asphalt of Marina Bay. In this vision, Verstappen qualifies at the front, controls the pace under the lights, and takes his very first win in Singapore. Such a victory would not just be historic on its own. It would serve as the definitive proof that the simulator breakthroughs were not illusions but reality. The psychological shock to McLaren would be enormous, because the one circuit they had always considered their stronghold would suddenly fall to the driver they feared most. A win here would ignite a genuine title fight, shifting the championship from a chase into a direct confrontation, with Verstappen regaining the aura of inevitability that once defined his dominance. The second scenario is less dramatic but still powerful. The setups deliver a partial improvement, enough for Verstappen to fight for a podium but not for victory. Even in this case, the consequences would be far-reaching. A second or third place in Singapore would erase the notion that Red Bull is automatically weak on high downforce circuits. It would prove progress, prove resilience, and prove that Verstappen can now be a threat anywhere. For McLaren and Piastri, the message would be just as intimidating: there are no safe havens left. Every race would become a battlefield with no certainty of advantage. That erosion of psychological security could be as decisive as points on the scoreboard, because champions are made not only in corners but also in the minds of their rivals. The third scenario is the nightmare, the collapse of hope. If the simulator data fails to match reality, if the RB21 once again overheats, slides in slow corners, and struggles to find grip, then Red Bull will face a crushing confirmation that some weaknesses cannot be erased. Verstappen would endure another painful weekend at the circuit that has tormented him for years, and the championship gap would widen to the point of near impossibility. It would be more than a defeat. It would be a symbolic blow, a reminder that preparation and innovation sometimes fall short under the harsh lights of competition. For Red Bull, it would also mean admitting that their supposed revolution was, at least for now, incomplete. And for McLaren, it would be a liberation, the assurance that their rival's greatest weakness remains intact. After the triumph in Baku, Verstappen did not simply celebrate and move on. He treated that victory as a launchpad, a signal that something had finally clicked with the RB21. Instead of resting on his laurels, he locked himself inside the Red Bull simulator in Milton Keynes, spending marathon sessions that stretched to 10 hours straight. Every detail was scrutinized, every weakness dissected. This was not the preparation of a driver content with one more trophy. This was the preparation of a man hunting a solution to the one track that has humiliated him time and again, Singapore. For Verstappen, the Marina Bay Street circuit is not just another race, it is the battlefield where his legacy has been repeatedly dented. Singapore has always demanded the kind of car Red Bull struggled to build. High downforce, brutal mechanical grip, stability in 20-degree bends taken at walking pace speeds. These are the very characteristics that used to expose the fragility of Red Bull's concepts, no matter how fast they were elsewhere. Verstappen knows this pain personally. He has stepped onto the podium, yes, but never on the top step. To a driver with victories on almost every circuit, that absence burns. Every season, the pattern repeated: domination on power tracks, frustration under the lights of Marina Bay. And that is why he has turned the simulator into his private laboratory. Not to polish details. To rewrite the playbook entirely. Inside the simulator, Verstappen pursued what insiders call revolutionary configurations. These were not tweaks of wing angle or minor suspension changes. They were new aerodynamic balances that combined the wider operating window of the Monza floor upgrade with mechanical setups designed for maximum traction. He worked through strategies for every possible scenario: overheated tires, humidity spikes, energy recovery management under safety cars. He even trained specific driving techniques for the constant stop-start rhythm of Singapore's corners. What emerged from those sessions was not just a setup, but a philosophy. One that dares to challenge the idea that Red Bull cars cannot master high downforce tracks. The most striking element is how far Verstappen went beyond conventional preparation. Engineers report sessions where he pushed through fatigue, mapping how the car would behave across track temperatures ranging from sweltering practice heat to the cooler, grippy asphalt of the night race. He explored balance changes that had previously been dismissed as unworkable. The simulator numbers showed something unexpected. The RB21 not only tolerated maximum downforce, it thrived on it, finding stability that had been absent all season. That revelation shook even Red Bull's engineering staff, because it contradicted years of assumptions about the car's limitations. This breakthrough could not have come at a more critical moment. Verstappen is 69 points behind Oscar Piastri, a gap that leaves no room for wasted weekends. A bad Singapore would cement the championship in McLaren's favor. A strong Singapore, on the other hand, would ignite the fight all over again. That is why Verstappen poured himself into those simulator marathons, because he knows the points deficit will not forgive another weak circuit. In Marina Bay, there is no middle ground. Either the RB21 becomes a weapon, or Red Bull's season fractures. His discovery has transformed Singapore from a death trap into a potential lifeline. And that is where the scandal lies. It is not just that Verstappen has prepared harder than anyone else. It is that his findings may have rewritten the hierarchy of the grid. A circuit that every rival had marked as Red Bull's weakness could now become the turning point of the year. Imagine the psychological blow if Verstappen, winless here for his entire career, suddenly dominates under the lights. That is the curiosity loop pulling us forward. We are about to see whether the simulator has handed him the key to his most elusive victory. This was only the beginning. The victory in Baku was not a coincidence, it was a statement. Verstappen did not just win, he dominated all 51 laps and crossed the line more than 14 seconds ahead of his rivals. That performance was a showcase of a car that had finally entered its performance window after weeks of uncertainty. The new floor introduced in Monza had changed everything, broadening the RB21's capacity to adapt to different circuits. The deficit in the championship, which had once seemed insurmountable, shrank to 69 points. What was most significant, however, was not the number itself, but the sense that Red Bull had finally discovered a direction. That direction was about to be pushed to the extreme in the simulator, where Verstappen was determined to transform data into a weapon capable of conquering his most painful track. What happened in Milton Keynes was more than a preparation exercise. Verstappen immersed himself in sessions that stretched for 10 hours, analyzing every line, every breaking point, and every possible energy deployment scenario. He was not searching for small improvements, he was rewriting the entire logic of how the RB21 should be configured for high downforce circuits. In those endless nights, Verstappen discovered configurations that allowed the car to remain stable even when overloaded with aerodynamic pressure. Engineers began referring to these setups as revolutionary, because they went against everything the team believed about its limitations. For years, Red Bull had compromised in Singapore, trying to survive. Now they were staring at the possibility of attacking. And here is the key question: would you, sitting on the Red Bull pit wall, trust the instincts of your driver and risk a radical configuration that had never touched real tarmac, or would you fall back on the old conservative setups that had guaranteed mediocrity in Singapore for almost a decade? That is the gamble Verstappen has put on the table. His work does not promise safety, it promises transformation. It is an invitation to abandon fear and embrace risk at the very moment when the championship allows no errors. For the fans, this is the drama Formula One lives for, the collision between innovation and the brutal reality of the stopwatch. History makes the stakes even sharper. Verstappen has raced 8 times at Singapore, and not once has he lifted the winner's trophy. He has 67 victories across almost every track on the calendar, but under the lights of Marina Bay he has never broken through. The closest he came were 2 second places and 1/3, each achieved through struggles that exposed the fundamental weaknesses of his machinery. In 2023, in the midst of one of the most dominant seasons ever recorded, he finished only 5th after qualifying in 11th. That single result summed up everything. Singapore was not just difficult, it was humiliating. And yet, if the simulator data proves true, this could be the weekend where kryptonite is turned into gold. Even the voices inside Red Bull carry a sense of expectation tinged with caution. Helmut Marko has admitted openly that Singapore is the real test, the benchmark that will expose whether the new approach works. Verstappen himself has spoken with an optimism rarely heard from him. This is a driver famous for his brutal honesty. When he says the car is ready, it is because he has seen numbers and felt behaviors that give him certainty. The projection is clear: if he is competitive in Singapore, then the narrative of the championship changes overnight. McLaren can no longer hide behind street circuits, Oscar Piastri loses his psychological advantage, and Red Bull regains momentum for the final 7 races of the year. From here, 3 scenarios emerge with clarity. The first, and most explosive, is that Verstappen wins in Singapore for the first time in his career, proving that the simulator work has broken the curse. That victory would not just cut the points gap, it would send a shockwave through the paddock. The second is that the setups deliver partial progress, enough for a podium, enough to show McLaren that Red Bull is no longer vulnerable, even if the win remains elusive. The third is failure: the simulator breakthroughs collapse under the pressure of real asphalt, and Red Bull face a devastating reminder that some weaknesses cannot be engineered away. Each path will decide not only the future of this season but the perception of Verstappen's ability to rewrite history. The emotional weight of Singapore cannot be underestimated. For Verstappen, winning there would mean silencing the last question mark of his career. For Red Bull, it would mean validating years of investment in simulator technology and daring to believe that no circuit is out of reach. If it works, Singapore becomes the platform for an epic championship comeback. If it fails, the defeat will hurt more than ever, because it would mean that even brilliance in preparation cannot conquer certain truths. The lights of Marina Bay will not just illuminate a race, they will illuminate the truth about Verstappen, about Red Bull, and about the direction of this entire championship. And the only certainty is that when those lights go out, Formula One will witness a defining moment. For Verstappen, Singapore has always been more than numbers on a championship table. It is the ghost that returns every September, the race that undermines his aura of invincibility. Even during seasons of overwhelming dominance, he has arrived in Marina Bay with doubt, watching rivals adapt better to the endless 90-degree corners and the suffocating humidity. That doubt has now been replaced with a confidence grounded in 10-hour simulator sessions and data that tells him something entirely new: the RB21 can finally breathe in Singapore. Imagine the psychological transformation of a driver who has turned his darkest weakness into a weapon. If he conquers Singapore, the message is clear: there are no more limits. For Red Bull, the stakes go beyond a single victory. A breakthrough in Singapore would validate an entire methodology, a way of preparing that fuses simulator precision with the instinct of a champion driver. It would prove that weaknesses are not destiny, that through persistence and innovation a team can reinvent itself mid-season. The engineers who once feared Marina Bay would instead see their work celebrated as the key to revival. McLaren, on the other hand, would feel the ground shift beneath them. What was once their secure advantage would vanish overnight, leaving Oscar Piastri to defend his lead without the safety net of circuits where Red Bull supposedly could not compete. That shift in psychology can decide championships as much as raw speed. And this is where the scandal truly lies: if Verstappen delivers in Singapore, it is not just another win. It is a rewriting of the Formula One map. It is the transformation of kryptonite into crown jewel, of weakness into strength. The lights will go out, the city will roar, and the world will watch to see if hundreds of hours in Milton Keynes have created the miracle Verstappen has been chasing. One victory could erase years of frustration and open the door to a championship comeback that once seemed impossible. The question is no longer whether Verstappen can fight back. The question is whether Singapore, the track that has broken him for so long, will now be remembered as the place where he became untouchable. The figures from Baku must be read carefully to understand their true impact. Verstappen did not simply cross the finish line ahead of his rivals, he obliterated them with a margin of more than 14 seconds, controlling all 51 laps from start to finish without giving George Russell or Carlos Sainz the slightest opportunity. The triumph reduced his deficit to Oscar Piastri to 69 points, but the mathematics only tell part of the story. That victory was the demonstration that the RB21, once unpredictable and fragile, had finally found stability. The floor introduced in Monza widened the car's performance window, allowing Verstappen to adapt with a flexibility that had been absent all season. Baku was the first proof of concept. The Real Laboratory, however, was the simulator where Verstappen pushed this new foundation to the limit in search of the one breakthrough that mattered most, conquering Singapore. Inside the simulator, Verstappen discovered something that Red Bull's own engineers had not dared to believe possible. The RB21, once destabilized by heavy downforce, began to show stability when pushed into extreme aerodynamic setups. It was as if the car had been redesigned by the very data being generated during those sessions. Verstappen did not stop at balance or suspension. He studied how the car reacted to different humidity levels, how tire temperatures evolved under long safety car interruptions, and how braking efficiency shifted as the asphalt cooled under the night sky. Each variable became part of a meticulous equation. The result was a series of revolutionary configurations that blended aerodynamics, mechanics, and tire management into a new philosophy. No longer would Red Bull compromise at Singapore. No longer would they arrive just to limit damage. The time had come to attack. And here lies the provocation to every fan. If you were in charge of Red Bull's race strategy, would you embrace these radical setups and risk everything on the data from a simulator, or would you choose the conservative path that history shows has never worked? It is a dilemma between courage and fear, between potential glory and predictable frustration. The truth is that Formula One is built on such risks. Every championship has turned on the moment when a team decided to leap into the unknown. Verstappen has given Red Bull the choice through his dedication, and now the question is whether the engineers will match his boldness when the cars line up under the floodlights of Marina Bay. History intensifies the stakes. Verstappen has 8 appearances in Singapore without a single victory, a record that clashes violently with his 67 wins elsewhere. His podiums there were achieved through relentless fights, never with dominance. The low point came in 2023, when he finished only 5th after qualifying 11th, a stark humiliation in a season where he was otherwise untouchable. Singapore has been the unyielding reminder that no driver, no matter how great, is invincible everywhere. That is why the revelations from the simulator are so powerful. If the RB21 suddenly thrives in Marina Bay, Verstappen will not just win another race. He will dismantle the myth of his weakness and replace it with a symbol of transformation. What was once kryptonite could become the jewel in his crown.